Thank you. We will now move to question time. Senator Wong.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Senator Payne, and I refer to the reports that Solomon Islands Prime Minister Mr Sogavare has told his parliament a security agreement between the Solomon Islands and China has been finalised and, quote, the document is ready for signing, end quote. When did the Australian government first become aware that China and Solomon Islands were negotiating a security agreement, and what action did the Australian government take in response?
The Minister for Foreign Affairs, Senator Payne.
Thank you, Mr President, and I thank Senator Wong for her question. We have been aware of increasing engagement, increasing interest in engagement with China in the Solomon Islands for some time, and we have absolutely and consistently demonstrated that Australia is always ready to support the Solomon Islands, together with members of the Pacific family, particularly in our work together. The most recent demonstration of that is the strength of the response of Australia, New Zealand, the Papua New Guinea and Fijian representatives of part of the Solomon Islands Assistance Force in November of last year, Mr President, which deployed more than 200 members of the AFP, the Defence Force and DFAT personnel to assist in the restoration of law and order. About 50 members of the ADF, the AFP and DFAT remain deployed in those tasks in the Solomon Islands. On 24th of March, the Solomon Islands Prime Minister also announced that we will be extending our bilateral security treaty assistance to support the Solomon Islands to prepare and assist for the Pacific Games, which are in December of 2023, that will construct a second patrol boat outpost on the Solomon Islands' eastern border, which is in addition to the western border and patrol boat outpost in the Shortland Islands. We'll also build an integrated police, health and disaster management radio network across the Solomon Islands. These are matters which have been under discussion for a period of time, particularly the latter, Mr President, the radio network, with Solomon Islands officials. For example, Minister Andrews and I participated in a bilateral security meeting with Foreign Minister Manelli and the Police Minister some months ago now, Mr President, in its regular rotation, I should say, as part of that process. And I would also say to the chamber that we've been clear—
Minister, your time has expired. Senator Wong, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Article 1 of the reported draft framework agreement states, and I quote, "The relevant forces of China can be used to protect the safety of Chinese personnel and major projects in Solomon Islands." What does the Minister and the government understand Article 1 of the reported draft agreement to mean?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. And a note in respect of the articles themselves. They're obviously not matters to which the Australian government is a party in the preparation of or the progression of, and we've been clear and regularly and respectfully raised our concerns with the Solomon Islands government about these matters of security engagement. And it is particularly concerning to us that there may be, associated with this, any actions that undermine the stability and the security of our region, which I have said previously and repeated in public comments in recent days. We believe that the Pacific family, in its broad, is best placed to provide security assistance to the Solomon Islands, and we stand ready to assist further if that is needed. We have been explicitly and emphatically clear in relation to that, and in fact not just in words, Mr President, because that is what our deeds demonstrate in all of our actions in relation to engagement on these matters with the Solomon Islands.
Your time has expired. Senator Wong, a second supplementary.
Thank you, Mr President. Can the Minister confirm that Australian bilateral official development assistance to Solomon Islands has been cut by $41.8 million, or 21%, since budget 2018-19?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. And Senator Seselja is right, but that is a misrepresentation. It does not incorporate consideration of Australia's construction of the Coral Sea cable from
Order
Honiara
on my
to
land.
Sydney and also, of course, to Port Moresby. What the senator also completely ignores.
Order.
So, Mr. President,
Order. Minister,
Mr. President,
Minister,
I would say
Minister,
that
resume your seat. Order in the chamber. Interjections are always disorderly. Please, let's hear the minister speak. Minister, you have the call.
Mr. President, I would say it is unlikely that some of the interjections from the other side that I can hear are audible more broadly, and particularly on the broadcast. But I would say, Mr. President, that those opposite have indicated in recent weeks their strong commitment to bipartisanship in matters of foreign policy. I fail to see that demonstrated here today.
Senator, order. Order. Senator Davey.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. My question is to the Minister for Emergency Management and National Recovery and Resilience, Senator Mackenzie. Can the minister please update the Senate on how the Liberal and Nationals government is supporting New South Wales and Queensland communities who have been affected by the recent devastating and ongoing flood emergencies?
Senator Watt.
Thank you, Senator Watt. I'd like to hear from the minister rather than you.
Order. Order. The Minister for Emergency Management, Senator Mackenzie.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Davey, for the question. Firstly, I want to extend mine and the government's, and I'm sure this chamber's, sincere condolences to the families and loved ones of the now 24 people who have lost their lives to the terrible flooding event that has started in Queensland on the 22nd of February and has spread throughout the East Coast to encompass over 81 local government areas in Queensland and New South Wales. I want to also thank our amazing SES, RFS, our emergency service volunteers, our ADF and all those wonderful Australians who've done what we are best known for, helping out our neighbours, our communities when times are tough. And this isn't over. Just today, the rains are continuing to fall, and right now we have 6 evacuation orders in these already traumatised communities. We will continue to work closely with both New South Wales and Queensland to ensure that support is available to those communities in need. And I just want to pay tribute to both my state Labor colleague in Queensland and my state Nationals colleague in New South Wales for working so collaboratively during this period. Having visited Lismore, Gympie, Ballina, Brisbane, other communities, as the former Governor-General said, Cosgrove, when he was on the ground in Lismore, it is like ground zero. This recovery effort isn't going to be a sprint, it's going to be a marathon, and our government has delivered the fastest rollout of both financial and non-financial assistance to these communities we've ever seen following a major disaster event. And it is, at a scale, this is likely to surpass our response to the Black Summer bushfires. In anticipation, we activated Comms Displan on the 25th of February, and it remains active. Queensland made its first request on the 26th of February, and later that week we also had requests in for Category A and B assistance from New South Wales. And since then we've been able to support over 1.4 million Australians in combination with our state government colleagues to get through this disaster.
Your time has expired. A supplementary question, Senator Davey.
Thank you, Minister. We've heard a lot about the Emergency Response Fund, which is available. Can you please explain how our government intends to use that fund to support Australians affected by these floods?
Minister.
Thank you. The Emergency Response Fund, a future fund, was designed to grow over the next decade to $6.6 billion. It's there when all other avenues of funding have been exhausted, and its primary purpose is to ensure that we're prepared for the future events, for future generations. And the legislation underpinning that fund is incredibly prescriptive about how it is used. The magnitude of the floods in this event and the extent of the damage that they've caused is exactly the type of scenario that the ERF was designed to deal with. And that is why we will draw down on the fund and use the $150 million allowed for this financial year to fund emergency response and recovery, with $75 million going to both the Queensland State Government and the New South Wales State Government. And we'll use $150 million for the 22-23 recovery specifically for
Senator
Lismore
Watt.
after the catastrophic flood event there, for them to be able to use it for flood mitigation following a study that the government will also
Minister.
fund.
Senator Davey, a second supplementary question.
Thank you. Minister, what other resilience measures has the government put in place to reduce the impact of future natural disasters?
Minister.
As the first Australian government to establish a national resilience-focused agency, I can absolutely confirm we are committed to building Australia's resilience to natural disasters. Our plan is more considered than simply rebranding a fund that already exists, as Labor is doing with its Disaster Ready Fund, under which it claims it will spend up to $200 million, not a ringing endorsement for a funding program. Unlike Labor, we're actually getting on with the job of building resilience, of giving communities hope for the future and support in the present, not politicising vulnerable communities who are struggling right now, whether it be bushfire-traumatised communities or current flooded communities, in their efforts to get back on their feet. Our $600 million Preparing Australia program will support communities to undertake disaster risk reduction and resilience initiatives to reduce the impact of future disasters, because we know here in this country this will not be the last flood, this will not be the last bushfire or cyclone that our people will have to deal with.
Your time has expired. Senator McAllister.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Emergency Management and National Recovery and Resilience, Senator Mackenzie. New South Wales Liberal Catherine Cusack MLC has described Mr Morrison's politicisation of flood relief as, and I quote, probably the most unethical approach I have ever seen. She has said she will resign, and I quote, she says, I can't defend it and I am outraged by it. How can the Morrison government defend its own approach when even New South Wales state Liberals won't defend it?
The Minister. Order. Order. Senator Watt. Order. 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 Senator Watt. Senator Watt, Senator Patterson and Senator Reynolds, you're not assisting. Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. Well, the rainfall and
Order.
subsequent flooding event that occurred in late February and early March and continues even today has caused devastation throughout these communities, particularly northern New South Wales and the 7 local government areas of the Northern Rivers. And unlike many of those opposite who are choosing to yell and scream about this devastating impact which has caused Australians to lose their lives, rather than actually hear about the things that, as a federal government, we've done in conjunction with the state government to actually support these communities. So right now, at the peak of Operation Flood Assist 22, there were 7,000 ADF personnel present across Queensland and New South Wales. Right now, there's around 4,000 ADF in Lismore itself, and they're assisting that community with the very tough task of getting the piles of rubbish that I know you've seen, Senator Watt, on the streets of Lismore, off the streets, of heading out into smaller communities of Wardell, Coraki, Broadwater and beyond to actually assist with the very long task of the clean-up. And they've been welcomed with open arms in these communities, open arms. And I know it was quite hard for the ADF.
Minister, on a point of order.
The point of order is relevance. The question went to the comments by Ms Cusack and, in particular, her comments regarding the ethics of the Morrison government's approach to flood relief. The minister hasn't gone to that question at all.
I've been listening carefully to the minister's answer. I cannot instruct the minister on how to answer a question. I believe she was being directly relevant to the question. Minister, you have 43 seconds.
Thank you very much, Mr President. Well, as we know, disaster recovery funding arrangements that were set up in 2018 are jointly funded by Commonwealth and state governments. And at the very day that these flooding events were occurring in New South Wales, these were activated by the New South Wales government, as is the appropriate governance arrangements for the disaster recovery funding arrangements. And in that first days of the flood event, we were rolling out temporary accommodation assistance with the New South Wales government. We were funding it. They are responsible for rolling it out. We were also assisting them with local council grants and the like for that immediate response. Now we've shifted to recovery.
Your time has expired. Senator McAllister, a supplementary question.
New South Wales Nationals MP Jeff Provost has said, and I quote, "The federal government have really messed this up. This is like a remake of the bushfires some 2 years ago." How can the Morrison government defend its own approach when even New South Wales Nationals won't defend it?
That's right.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr President. Well, as I said in my previous answer, we have been able to get, at a Commonwealth level, both non-financial, being the ADF boots on the ground, the Taipan helicopters, rescuing people off roofs, in Lismore itself within hours, because we did pre-posture ahead of that request from the New South Wales government. And we have even now 4,000 ADF on the ground. So non-financial support in record time and financial support in record time, rolled out through Services Australia and our own disaster payment and disaster recovery allowance. Now, it might not suit the Labor Party's narrative, who wants to politicise natural disasters, but what Australians in need want to hear from their leaders, what Australians in need want to hear from their political leaders, irrespective of whether they're federal or state, irrespective of whether they're Labor or Liberal, is actually working together to get the response where it's needed, when it's needed.
It is becoming increasingly difficult to hear the minister's answers. Senator McAllister, a second supplementary question.
Thanks, Mr President. Well, Mr Provost also declared that he was disgusted by Mr Morrison, and I quote him again. He said, "I would struggle to vote for him." When even members of the New South Wales Liberals and Nationals can't defend Mr Morrison, can't stomach voting for him and are disgusted with him, does the minister really expect Australians to feel differently?
Minister.
As I was saying, Australians in need are quite offended by those in the privileged positions that we hold for cheap political point scoring. They want us to get on with the job of assisting them in their time of need. And whether it is that immediate response phase in the immediate days when people are actually thousands of people are homeless here, getting temporary accommodation sorted, making sure they've got cash in their accounts to purchase petrol, purchase clothes. That's exactly what the Palaszczuk government partnered with us to do, as did the Perrottet state government do with the Commonwealth. And once we move into the recovery phase, which we are now in, and this is going to last a long time, we are rolling out additional measures depending on what the state governments decide. So Palaszczuk government wanted to give, in their Category D response, $20,000 to community groups. The Perrottet government chose to—
Minister, your time has expired. Senator Whish-Wilson.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to Senator Hume, representing the Minister for the Environment. Senator Hume, could you please update the chamber on the Minister Susan Lay's comments or her updates on the devastating and very concerning news that the Great Barrier Reef is experiencing its fourth mass coral bleaching in the last 6 years?
The Minister representing the Minister for the Environment, Senator Hume.
Thank you very much, Mr President, and I thank Senator Whish-Wilson for his question. Mr President, the Commonwealth Government, the Morrison government, is deeply committed to protecting the World Heritage-listed Great Barrier Reef. One sentence in. The tourism industry, traditional owners, reef communities, they rely on the Morrison government's commitment to the reef, and we will not let them down. Before COVID closed the world's borders, economic activity stemming from the reef was worth an estimated $6.4 billion annually and 64,000 jobs. Mr President, the Morrison government's enduring commitment to the protection of the reef was demonstrated just last Friday with the announcement of an additional $1 billion in new funding. Now, this additional funding takes the total funding by the Australian and Queensland governments to more than $4 billion by 2030. More than $3 billion of this is from the Australian government. Benchmarked against global standards, Australia's management of the reef is recognised as a leading example and is considered by many—
Minister, please resume your seat. Senator Whish-Wilson on a point of order.
Point of order on relevance, President. I asked a very quick question. I asked the Minister to update us on Minister Lay's comments regarding the devastating news from last week. We don't need talking points. I'd actually like her to address my question.
I've heard your point of order. I've been listening to the minister's answer. The minister was being directly relevant to the question. I cannot direct a minister how to answer a question. The minister was being relevant to the question. I've been listening. Minister, you have the call. You have just over a minute remaining.
Thank you, Mr President. So, benchmarked against global standards, Australia's management of the reef is recognised as a leading example and is considered by many to be the gold standard for large-scale marine protected area management, according to the UNESCO report. This $1 billion package will enhance Australia's world-leading management of the reef in 4 separate ways.
Minister, resume your seat. Senator McKim.
Thank you.
Sorry, Senator McKim, it's been a while.
It has been a while. I was just waiting for the call, President. The point of order is on the same matter that Senator Whish-Wilson raised a point of order, that is relevance. The question specifically and only related to the current mass bleaching event on the Great Barrier Reef. The minister has not mentioned the mass bleaching event two-thirds of the way through the time allocated for the answer. I simply ask you, President, if you would remind the minister of the question, please.
You have had a chance to remind the minister of the question. I've been listening to the minister's answer. The minister was being relevant to the question. Minister, you have the call. 40 seconds remaining.
Thank you, Mr President. I'm happy to mention mass bleaching. Now it is mentioned, because mass bleaching is one issue that affects the Great Barrier Reef. Other issues that affect the Great Barrier Reef are changes in climate. Other issues that affect the Great Barrier Reef are crown of thorns starfish. And this additional $1 billion investment that takes the Commonwealth's funding up to $3 billion is just one of the ways that we can address all of the issues that are facing the Great Barrier Reef, for which we are known as the gold standard in response to large-scale marine protected area management, according to UNESCO itself. So there are 4 ways—
Minister, your time has expired. Senator Whish-Wilson, a supplementary question.
My supplementary question is to ask the same question a different way, so perhaps the minister can respond this time. What has the Federal Environment Minister said about the 4th mass coral bleaching in the last 6 years on the Great Barrier Reef?
Order. Minister, you have the call.
Thank you, Mr President. I thank Senator Whish-Wilson for saying it louder, because I didn't hear it properly the first time quite clearly. So I will happily say that this additional $1 billion package that will enhance Australia's world-leading management of the reef will do so in 4 ways. First and foremost, it will accelerate progress towards water quality targets. Mr President, we're extending efforts to improve reef water quality and meet our agreed targets under—
Senator Whish-Wilson on a point of order.
On a point of order and on relevance, Mr President, this is an international crisis and the minister is refusing to answer the question. It is a disgrace. It is a bloody disgrace.
Senator Whish-Wilson, resume your seat. This is not a debating time. There is no point of order. Minister— Senator Whish-Wilson, I am not aware what people are asking you to withdraw, and I do not wish you to repeat it. However, if you said something that you should withdraw, please withdraw it. Senator Whish-Wilson, I will review the transcript following question time. Minister, you have the call.
Thank you, Mr President. So, this new $1 billion investment, which is in addition to the already existing $4 billion investment between the Commonwealth and the Queensland governments, will accelerate progress towards water quality targets. It will, in addition to that, continue our world-leading reef management conservation partnerships.
Minister, resume your seat. Senator Whish-Wilson.
Question. What has the Environment Minister said about the mass coral bleaching? What
This
has she
is
said?
not a debating time. Senator Whish-Wilson, as I've said already on a number of occasions today, I cannot direct a minister how to answer a question. You have brought the minister back to a particular to the question that you asked. However, I have been listening to the minister's answer, and I believe she was relevant to the question. Minister, you have the call. You have 21 seconds remaining.
Thank you, Mr. President. The third thing that money will do is support climate adaptation science, research and development. And the fourth—
Minister, resume your seat. Senator McKim.
Thank you, President. On a point of order, and the point of order is direct relevance, I simply ask you, please, and later or now, as you wish, Mr. President, but to rule on whether a question that is seeking specifically a response as to what the minister said about an issue can be responded to in a relevant way by simply talking about the issue. That is the matter that I think would assist the Senate. If you could rule on that, I'd be very happy for you to take it away and come back at your leisure, President. But I do think that's an important matter to have clarified for the Senate.
I will come back to the chamber tomorrow with a fulsome explanation. However, I believe that the minister is being directly relevant to the question in answering the way she has. I will explain my position tomorrow. And, Minister, you have the call for 14 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. And finally, the fourth element of that funding will to fund on-the-ground community and traditional owner-led projects. Now, I understand that Labor and the Greens tend to seek to politicise the reef, but the coalition will continue its long legacy of protecting it.
Minister, your time has expired. A second supplementary. Senator Whish-Wilson.
Thank you, President. 2 UNESCO scientists have been in Australia in the last week, visiting the Barrier Reef at this government's invitation, to assess whether climate change is impacting the World Heritage values of the Great Barrier Reef and its UNESCO listing. Can you confirm that those scientists visited reefs that have bleached? And if so, which reefs did they visit?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President. I can confirm that scientists were here associating with the Reef Authority, and Reef Authority staff have been working with those research partners from the Australian Institute of Marine Science to conduct aerial surveys across the reef. Those surveys concluded on Wednesday the 23rd of March, but the results are still being analysed. The minister is aware that these surveys have detected widespread coral bleaching over a large area of the reef, and these surveys indicate variable levels of bleaching between different regions.
Minister, please resume your seat. Senator Whish-Wilson, on a point of order.
On a point of order on relevance, Minister, President.
No, I'm happy to rule straight away that the minister was being directly relevant, Senator Whish-Wilson.
Well,
that she could not have been more relevant.
These surveys have nothing to do with the UNESCO visit.
Points of order
have
are
nothing
not
to
an
do with the
opportunity
UNESCO.
to debate.
Well, having a minister
Senator
who actually
Whish-Wilson,
knows what she's
resume your
talking about.
seat. Senator Whish-Wilson. Question time is not a debating forum. Senator Whish-Wilson, there was no point of order. Minister, you have... Senator Whish-Wilson. Minister, you have the call. You have 35 seconds remaining.
Thank you, Mr. President. So these surveys indicated variable levels of bleaching between different regions and between different reefs. Some reefs are unaffected, others experiencing minor paling, and some where the heat stress is greatest are severely impacted. That is correct. It's important to note that corals can, in fact, survive bleaching events, and some corals will be mildly or moderately affected, and some will recover when favourable conditions return. The bleaching follows a summer of very hot weather following record-breaking temperatures across the reef. But the Reef Authority will continue to brief the minister on reef conditions as the data becomes increasingly available.
All right. Senator Griff.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is to Senator Colbeck, representing the Minister for Health, and it relates to the cost of healthcare in Australia. Minister, when the Medical Costs Finder website was launched 2 years ago, it was found that patients in some states were paying out-of-pocket costs up to 40 times more than patients in other states for some procedures. Fee transparency was supposed to alleviate this problem. Minister, can you tell me whether the Medical Costs Finder website has helped a single patient by reducing their out-of-pocket costs?
The Minister representing the Minister for Health, Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. Thank Senator Griff for the question and some notice of the general topic of the question. Mr President, the government continues to invest in Australia's world-leading health system to ensure that Australians do have access to high-quality health services at reasonable cost. The current situation with respect to bulk billing, for example, sees the bulk billing rate at a record high of 83.5%, which is 6.5% higher than when we came to government in 2013. And GP billing, bulk billing records remain at record highs over the 2021 calendar year. The current over that 21 calendar year, the bulk billing rate was 88.7%, 6.9% higher than in 2012, Mr President. Senator Griff is correct. The purpose of the Medical Cost Web Finder site was to provide some visibility and transparency to support Australians to understand what their medical costs might be so that they could make appropriate decisions with respect to where they might access those costs. I don't have with me any specific data in relation to the outcomes of those elements from the initial build, noting that the Medical Cost Finder website is still in its initial stages of being developed and there are further stages to be considered, and I understand that Minister Hunt has indicated a willingness to work with you, as we have done on other previous sites that have provided visibility, to continue to improve that information to be made available to Australians across the board. But what we continue to do, Mr President, is to invest into Australia's world-leading health system, and whether that's into the MBS system.
Minister, your time has expired. Senator Griff, a supplementary question.
Minister, you haven't actually answered my question. I would have thought that you would have been able to say that at least a single patient might have benefited in some way. Can you actually tell me whether there has actually been a reduction in how much individuals spend overall on health care over this term of government?
Minister.
Thanks, Mr President. I actually don't have any data on individual spends, but I do have information, as I was just going through, about the amount of funding that the government continues to put into Australia's world-leading health system to support Australians to access at reasonable cost their care. So if you look at, for example, Australian government's funding to public hospitals, that's grown from $13.3 billion in 2012-13 to $25.5 billion in 2021. Mr President, by 90% over that period of time.
Minister, resume your seat. Senator Griff, on a point of order.
Relevance, Mr President. My question was not how much government spends on health care, but how much individuals spend on health care, and whether there has been a reduction in how much they spend as a result of this particular site.
The minister did respond to that question. However, I will remind, when questions are narrowly framed, it is important to remain within the bounds of the question. Minister, you have the call. If you have anything you wish to add, for 20 seconds.
Thank you, Mr President. I did specifically address that point, and I did indicate that I didn't have any specific data. And so, on that with me, Mr President. But what I did
Senator
do,
Lambie,
Mr President, was indicate the continued expansion of funding into the health system to Australians to ensure that they can access a high-quality health system.
Your time has expired. Senator Griff, a second supplementary.
Thank you, Mr President. Minister, Australia has been reported as having the third highest reliance on individual health care contributions in the world. That's massive. What will government do, if re-elected, to lower the cost for individual Australians? Not government costs, but the actual cost to patients, to the public.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. And I don't accept the premise of the question, because government spending on health actually does contribute to the cost that would otherwise be the case for Australians with respect to the health system. That's why, Mr President, that's why we continue to invest in world-leading drugs through the MBS to make sure that Australians can access them at cheaper prices. That's why we do that, Mr President. And we continue to list drugs, take older ones off, put new ones on, so Australians have access to the best possible drugs at a reduced price so that they don't have to pay so much for their health system. That's why we continue to invest so heavily in the public health system. So if they can't have access to private health services, they can access it publicly through the public health system, Mr President. That's why we continue to invest. And, Mr President, that's why the Australian government's investment in the public health system is so important, and it does actually contribute to lowering costs to Australians in accessing Australia's World Health Best Health System.
Senator Sheldon.
My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Cash. Today, residents of South East Queensland and northern New South Wales face more flooding, with evacuation orders issued in a number of Northern Rivers towns. Residents are still cleaning up from last month's devastating floods, in which they were abandoned by this Prime Minister. What will Mr Morrison do to make these floods victims are not abandoned by his government yet again?
The Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Cash.
Thank you, Mr President, and I thank Senator Sheldon for the question. And in relation to the question, Senator Sheldon, I completely reject what you have just said. This government has not forgotten the people in the floods. In fact, what I would say is that the floods that occurred in late February and early March, they have caused devastation throughout New South Wales, or northern New South Wales and the southern Queensland area, on a scale that has not been seen, as we all know, since 2011. And in response to that, the Australian government is providing over $2.5 billion, Mr President, over $2.5 billion in financial support in response to this devastating flood. And, Mr President, just to ensure Senator Sheldon does understand that the Australian government is working with both the New South Wales and the Queensland government in relation to the provision of our financial support, Senator Sheldon, as at the 28th of March, so only yesterday, $1.3 billion has been paid to over 1.4 million Australians, and that is through the Australian Government Disaster Recovery Payment and the Special Supplement and the Disaster Recovery Allowance. Mr President, there has been $291 million of 100%, Senator Sheldon, Commonwealth-funded, 100% Commonwealth-funded, direct support for those affected by the floods in New South Wales and Queensland. And you would be aware that this is in addition to targeted support announced for each state. Mr President, I could go on, but, Senator Sheldon, this government is working with New South Wales and Queensland to ensure that we respond appropriately.
Your time has expired. Senator Sheldon, a supplementary question.
When Lismore flooded a month ago, residents had to use their own speedboats and crowd-fund private helicopters to rescue each other and were left to clean up on their own. As a Lismore community worker said in the aftermath, where is the government? Why does Scott Morrison always abandon Australians when they need him?
Minister.
Well, Senator Sheldon, again, I completely reject the premise of that question. And I have just outlined for you, Senator Sheldon, the significant financial support that the government is providing to those that have been affected by what is, Mr President, the devastation caused by the floods, and that type of flooding has not been seen since 2011. But, Mr President, the Australian government has taken significant action, as we often hear Senator Mackenzie outline in this chamber. And in particular, Senator Sheldon, the following actions have been taken. This is in addition to the $2.5 billion that we are providing in financial support in response to the devastating flood. The COMSD plan was activated, Senator Sheldon, as you know, on the 25th of February. We activated the National Emergency Declaration on the 11th of March 2022.
Minister, your time has expired. Senator Sheldon, a second supplementary question.
Well, the Prime Minister fled to Hawaii during Black Summer. He didn't order vaccines. He didn't order rats. He didn't show up for floods last month. Why does Scott Morrison always leave Australians to fend for themselves when people most need help?
Minister, order. Order. Order, Senator Watt. Minister.
Well, again, Mr President, this is what you get from Labor. Nothing more and nothing less than actually politicising events in which this government is working on the ground with the New South Wales government and the Queensland government. This government will stand by Australians every step of the way. And, Senator Sheldon, if I took you through on a portfolio-by-portfolio basis, I can assure you that this is a government that does back Australians every single step of the way. This is a government that believes in the resilience of the Australian people. This is a government that, faced with a global pandemic, has ensured that we took those decisions that would protect both Australia and Australians, whether it was JobKeeper, JobSeeker or the health response. And when it comes to the devastating floods, we are again working with the affected people on the ground to ensure that they get the support that they require.
Order. Senator Mirabella.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Cash. Senator, how does the Liberal and National Government's plan for our economic recovery ensure job security for all Australians, not only now but into the future?
The Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Cash.
Thank you, Mr President, and I thank Senator Mirabella for the question. And I do understand, Senator Mirabella, that it is your first question in this place. And how fitting, Senator Mirabella, that you ask a question in which the Australian people are actively interested, and that is, of course, Australia's economic recovery and how the policies of the Morrison government have in particular got more people back into work. Mr President, we know that on this side of the chamber, governments themselves do not create jobs. That is for the businesses out there, the employers out there. Government put in place policies under which businesses are able to prosper, to grow and create more jobs for Australians. And colleagues, you will recall that in 2020, Labor's Jim Chalmers said this: "The single biggest test of the government management of the pandemic is what happens to unemployment and jobs." Well, Mr President, on Jim Chalmers' own analysis, this is a government, Senator Mirabella, that has delivered for the Australian people. And what the budget tonight will show, is that the unemployment rate will drop, colleagues, to 3 3/4% later this year. And if you compare that, colleagues, to what the unemployment was in September 13, the unemployment rate September 2013, colleagues, 5.7% under Labor, and as former Senator Cormann used to always say, and rising, because that's their track record, and rising. Currently under the coalition government, under the Morrison government, it is 4%. And what you will see in the budget tonight is 3 3/4% later this year. Mr President, jobs are important to the Australian people. Work is important to the Australian people. And tonight you will see the lowest rate in half a century. This is a government that believes in policies to ensure businesses are able to employ more Australians.
Senator Mirabella, a supplementary question.
Yes, thank you, Mr President. Senator Cash, how is the government's economic plan helping Australian families have the opportunity to achieve the Australian dream of owning their own home?
Minister.
Well, Mr President, again, the government, we understand that home ownership is so important to the Australian people. And what we are doing is we are making home ownership a reality for thousands more Australians. Mr President, as part of our government's plan for a stronger future, we are supporting even more aspiring homeowners to get into the market, and the way we're going to do that, and we'll have more to say about that tonight, is to build on the remarkable success of our government's home guarantee scheme. What we will now do is we will more than double the program to 50,000 places a year. This means that with this program, because it does get people into their home, we'll continue to help more single parents buy a home with a deposit as low as 2% and help more first home buyers with a deposit as low as 5%. That great Australian dream of home ownership, tonight you'll hear more about it.
Senator Mirabella, a second
Mr.
supplementary
President.
question.
Senator, looking to the future, what are the risks to Australia's economic recovery as we continue to live with COVID-19 and the rising security challenges that face our region?
Minister.
Well, Mr President, as Senator Watt was screaming out across the chamber, what are the risks to the Australian people? Well, Senator Watt, what I would actually say is an Albanese government. Because you see, Mr President, what does an Albanese government stand for? Well, over the last 30 years, Labor has delivered higher unemployment, higher interest rates, higher electricity prices, and colleagues, let us not forget, they have not delivered a single balanced budget. Contrast that with Prime Minister Morrison. Prime Minister Morrison, who is ensuring that this government puts in place policies that enables businesses to prosper, grow, create more jobs for Australians. This government that now has more Australians in work than we did prior to COVID-19. This government that understands that Australians deserve more of what they earn, and that's why we believe in lowering taxes.
Minister, your time has expired. Senator Lambie.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is for the Minister for Foreign Affairs. Minister, you and I both know Russia is going after civilians and children in Ukraine. 300 people died in Mariupol when a Russian plane bombed the drama theatre where they were taking shelter. Russia's attacking schools, hospitals and evacuation routes. Little kids are dying at a phenomenal rate. It is brutal and it is shocking. You've previously said that the international targeting of civilians is a war crime. Is Vladimir Putin a war criminal?
The Minister for Foreign Affairs, Senator Payne.
Thank you, Mr President, and I thank Senator Lambie for her question. And the issues that she raises are deeply serious issues in terms of the actions that are being taken by Russia in Ukraine. There are identified a number of acts, and Senator Lambie has referred to those, and the catastrophic humanitarian toll is growing, as we know. There has been a reference to the International Criminal Court, which Australia supported, and that International Court will make its assessment. There has also been a decision by the International Court of Justice, which enables investigations of these matters to begin now. My understanding is that work will be underway as a result of that International Court of Justice question. But to be clear, as Senator Lambie indeed has been, the bombing of a school where it is known that hundreds of civilians are sheltering, the forced deportation of Ukraine residents, and particularly from Mariupol to Russia, an airstrike on a theatre where it is known that civilians are sheltering, the bombing of a maternity hospital in Mariupol, the damaging of over 460 schools, over 40 health facilities in Ukraine, indicates that these are matters of criminal behaviour in wartime. That is the reference which will be considered, Mr President. That is the reference Australia supported and supports, and I will continue to do that on behalf of all members of this Senate.
Senator Lambie, a supplementary question.
Minister, Article 8 of the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court states that it is a war crime to, and I quote, intentionally direct attacks against the civilian population as such or against individual civilians not taking direct part in hostilities. Putin's men are killing kids. I don't doubt they're doing it on his orders, and I don't doubt you do either. So I'm asking you, basically, are you going to have the courage to come out and call him for what he is? Putin is a war criminal. When is Australia's Foreign Minister going to call him for what he is? He is a war criminal. Call it.
Order. Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. Senator Lambie, with the greatest of respect, I believe I responded to the questions that you raised in my first answer.
Senator Lambie, a second supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. President Biden says that Putin is a butcher who is bent on violence. He can't see how Putin can possibly remain in power after everything he's done. Do you at least back President Biden's statements?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. The Australian government is working as closely as possible with a range of international partners, and that most certainly includes the United States, the United Kingdom, members of the European Union, non-EU members, non-EU countries in Europe, as well as our counterparts in Japan, in Korea, in New Zealand, in Singapore and others in the region. The Australian government has taken the strongest possible approach to our sanctions listings, Mr President, including listing over 500 individuals and entities. That includes, of course, President Putin himself and President Putin's most senior advisers, the members of the Duma, who I regard and Australia regards as the political facilitators of this egregious invasion, senior members of the Belarusian system as well, including President Lukashenko and his immediate family.
I'm sorry, Senator Lambie, on a point of order.
Yeah, point of order is I just simply want to know, is President Biden says that Putin is a butcher, does she agree?
Senator Lambie, you have reminded Minister of your question. However, the Minister was being directly relevant. Minister, you have the call for 11 seconds.
Thank you, Mr President, and let me conclude by saying that the strongest possible costs need to be imposed upon Russia. Australia is a very strong participant in the sanctions process, having imposed the sanctions I outlined earlier, and others.
Minister. Senator Lambie. Senator Lambie. Senator Seselja. Senator Watt.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Emergency Management and National Recovery and Resilience, Senator Mackenzie. In her train-wreck interview with the Today Show, the minister was asked 5 times what the threshold was for declaring a national emergency after the floods. 5 times she was unable to answer. Can the minister now explain the threshold for declaring a national emergency?
Minister for Emergency Services, Senator Mackenzie.
Thank you very much, Mr President. Well, as Senator Watt rightly highlights, on the 11th of March, the Governor-General enacted the National Emergency New South Wales Floods 2022 Declaration. The Prime Minister formally recommended a national emergency declaration following advice from the Director-General of Emergency Management Australia, Joe Buffoni, who has also briefed Senator Watt in my own personal efforts to make sure that we're as bipartisan as possible in dealing with this crisis. On the 10th of March, this advice was provided in consultation with a range of Commonwealth agencies based on the best possible information available at that point in time. The Prime Minister must be satisfied that the scale and impact of the floods meet the legal threshold to declare a national emergency. The making of a national emergency declaration enlivens a range of powers to make it easier for affected communities to access Commonwealth assistance, including empowering ministers to suspend, vary or substitute red tape requirements, for example, to make it easy for affected individuals with supplying identification, for instance, when they may have to apply for certain funding, disaster relief funding. Allows the Prime Minister to access information from Commonwealth entities on stockpiles.
Minister, resume your seat. Senator Watt, on a point of order.
Thanks, Mr President. On relevance, the minister referred to a threshold in her answer, but my question was what the threshold was. So could we get an answer on that, please?
You've reminded the minister of the question. I am listening, but so far I believe the minister has been relevant to the question. But I will also point out, seeing as those opposite are interjecting in my ruling, that the question began with a highly political preamble. A narrowly framed question cannot start with a highly political preamble. Senator, order. Senator Mackenzie, order. Senator Watt, you are wasting the Senate's time now. Senator Mackenzie, you have the call for 38 seconds.
Thank you very much. Well, the Prime Minister has to be satisfied, as I said, that the scale and impact of the floods meet that threshold to declare it. Now, with this particular event, there was not one single event within the natural disaster as it occurred. Rather, it was the cumulative effect of the weather pattern as it rolled from Gympie right down the east coast, dumping, as the Bureau of Meteorology has said, a 1 in 500 year event catastrophe on Lismore itself. And based on the cumulative impact of that event over time, the Prime Minister—
Minister, your time has expired. Senator Watt, a supplementary question.
It's probably best that I re-ask. Does the minister know what the threshold is that her department uses when advising to declare a national emergency? What is the threshold?
Minister.
As I said, the Prime Minister himself must be satisfied that the event actually meets the threshold, and he bases that on a range of data and advice. And as I outlined—
Minister, on a point of order.
On a point of order, relevance. What is the threshold? What is the threshold?
Order. Senator Mackenzie, on the point of order.
Sorry, I didn't think we were able to restate questions in points of order, so I was wondering whether that was the second supplementary, the first supplementary, or indeed just restating the first question.
Senator Mackenzie, that is a debating point. Senator Wong. Do you want the call? Senator Wong, on the point of order.
On the point of order, which is a point of order around direct relevance. The first supplementary, there was no political preamble. It was a very clear question to this minister about what is the threshold. I would ask you to remind this minister of the question.
I was listening to the minister's answer, and I believe she was being relevant, so I am not going to remind her of the question. You have reminded her of the question, Senator Wong. I do not believe there was anything in the minister's answer so far that was not relevant to the question. Order. Minister, you have the call for 44 seconds.
Yes, thank you, Mr President. Thank you. Well, the Australian Disaster Preparedness Framework defines a severe and catastrophic disaster as an event that is beyond current arrangements, thinking, experience and imagination, has overwhelmed our technical, non-technical and social systems and resources, has degraded and disabled governance structures and strategic and operational decision-making functions. So in developing the advice to consider a declaration, the agencies are provided information on the following criteria. Okay? Listen up. Historical analysis and recurrence, the concurrence and compounding effects and scale of the events, as I outlined in my first answer, demographics, weather impacts—
Minister, your time has expired. Senator Watt, second supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. When asked why it took the Prime Minister so long to declare a national emergency following the recent floods, this minister replied that the Prime Minister must consult with state and territory premiers. But the relevant legislation clearly states the Prime Minister does not need to consult premiers if, and I quote, "it is not practicable to do so." Why did the minister mislead flood victims when trying to explain the Prime Minister's delay in declaring a national emergency?
Minister.
Given Senator Watt's issue around the threshold, I can answer both. Finish the threshold, because there's quite a lot of thresholds. The weather impacts, the economic impacts, the flood extent, as I said, going down the east coast, vulnerability of disadvantaged populations, information, essential services and impact duration. Now, Mr President, going to Senator Watt's substantive—
On the point of order.
Point of order, Mr President. I asked two questions asking for the threshold, and now I've asked a different question and I'm getting an answer to that question.
Senator Watt. Senator Watt.
Do I need to restate this question?
I don't believe you do. I think the minister is very well aware of the question. Minister, I heard the minister getting to the question. Minister, you have the call. 46 seconds remaining.
I am seeking to be helpful. The fact of the matter is that the Prime Minister was not unable to consult with both Premier Perrottet and Premier Palaszczuk, because he was actually able to consult with both of them. He doesn't need them both to agree to declare a national emergency, but he does need to have the conversation, and then he can choose to declare it or not, unilaterally or not. So the Prime Minister contacted both Premier Palaszczuk and Premier Perrottet to actually consult them around the first time we've ever actually used this particular emergency power.
Minister, please resume your feet. Senator Cash.
I ask that further questions be now placed on notice.